So I am Brady Tom. I am the leader of the TBC Tableau user group. I've been running the group for about 2 years now. And we meet, I guess, bi-monthly. Hopefully next year that's going to be more. And hopefully we're going to do some a more variety of events, not just presentations. So first, thank you to Mike from Autora. So he's going to come up. This is their space. So thank you for allowing us to be here today.
I'm data science, data engineering, and business intelligence teams, which means a whole lot more than Tableau. If you don't know about Autora, we're in the reverse linguistic space. What that means, the easiest way for me to explain this is think about that thing that you got as a gift, and you want to return it because you don't like it, you don't need it, whatever that is. Where does that thing go? Well, in a traditional space, where that goes is worst case scenario, a landfill. Most likely, somebody's selling it in wholesale, and they're getting basically. We have a platform that optimizes all of that. It figures out how to reduce how many touches that you need to go through and find the right one for it so that it maximizes what that person can get back in and keeps it out of the loop. So a whole bunch of cool stuff there. We are also currently hiring here. We have tons and tons of roles open right now. Go to Autora.com, there's a careers page, there's lots of good stuff. But things that I mostly care about here are senior product manager, tons and tons of software engineers at all levels. We're primarily a Ruby shop, but if you know other languages, still talk to us. BI analysts, that will be in my reporting teams. I strongly care about that. Along with the, we've got a couple of data science-y type roles, data scientists, data analysts. And then if you're just more talking to people, we have solutions roles open as well. So lots of different roles. If you're interested in anything, you just want to talk about Autora, come find me somewhere. A couple housekeeping notes. Snowflake guys have been awesome about bringing food and drinks, which is fantastic. As such, please leave my beer tents a little bit. If you haven't found them already, when you go through the elevator banks, to the right is the ladies' room, to the left is the men's room. All right, I think that's it for me. Is that right? Right here. Behind me.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? My name is Ryan Kearns. I'm a sales director at Snowflake. Back we have Teddy Lewis. He's a regional director, so I'm not treating you guys right. You can say to him and I'll get in trouble. But in any case, who here knows about Snowflake? Who knows what Snowflake does? All right, perfect. Well, for those of you who don't, Snowflake is a data warehouse built for the cloud. We run AWS and Azure. We are a huge Tableau partner. I personally work with Mike a lot, and basically the 3 pillars that we were built upon were concurrency, simplicity, and speed. So if you guys, being Tableau users, want to interact with the data quickly, use Snowflake. So with that being said, I'll kind of turn things over.
Okay. All right. So we're going a little bit out of order if you happen to be looking at the Unite website, because 2 out of the 3 presenters were running late. So we're actually starting at the end. But it should be very
Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. Thank you, Toro, for hosting us. Thank you, Snowflake, for setting the stage and for beer and the pizza. So, Datadog is just enough. Alright, so my name is Ekal. Mostly I work as Director of Business Intelligence at Associated Net. We are headquartered out of Western Virginia and with offices in Texas and Florida. So we are a dedicated solution provider company. And I'll give a little bit more background, but the agenda for our today's discussion is how to drive BI adoption and how to balance it. So what is Technical Development? We are a telemedicine solution provider. In the last 1 or 2 years, you might have seen some telemedicine solutions offered by insurance provider. How many of you are familiar with telemedicine? What have used one. Teladoc is one brand name that you might see that's a consumer brand. We work primarily with hospitals. Emphasis is around the country, working with more than 500 hospitals and focus on some niche specialties such as acute neurology, acute psychiatry, critical care, hospitals. And if you don't know this clinical terms, that's okay. A large part of our business involves helping patients who have stroke. In this slide over here, on the left-hand side, a couple of our physicians are looking at the CT scan. Stroke happens if you have blood clot in the brain, and that can be life-threatening. If this is not treated in time, people have quality of life issues, paralysis, things like that. Brain is approximately 2 million cells every is restricted blood. And these blood cells never reach you. That's why people have this confidence. Our experiment provides a good solution for the needs. We have physicians who are staff custom developed EMR as well as some brief stats about us as a development. We are in over 500 hospitals. We have different technology solutions that includes telemedicine card, different tools, scheduling solutions, as well as bringing doctors and patients together. We operate on 24/7. Most of our use cases, we work with emergency rooms, patients who are having stroke or psychiatric and patients who are having suicide. Most of our cases involve emergency coverage. So, as part of our offering, we also provide reporting and analytics to our customers, and that's where our strategy is. So, before we brought in Tableau, this is how our reporting stack looked like in 2015. We didn't have a lot of investments in tools and technologies at that time. Most of these were manually, so data analysts would print out the numbers instead of which were being manually recorded for every customer. So as you can imagine, this wasn't really scalable. And along with Excel, we had all those things that come with it. At some point, we one of our IT helpers deployed this number of more than 600,000 cell files in our shared files. And you probably have seen this, multiple variations of those cell files, stakeholders, so one good. So we bought Tableau in 2015, and just to provide some background why Tableau and how we came to the decision. This might be a bit similar to some of the process or evaluation process that some of you have gone through already. But Tableau has been getting popular over the past 4 years. It has a financial quadrant, this is an image from Data Micro at PC18 just last week, a week ago, and there were more than 70,000 people. So they talk and the WordPress, and that's probably also our business leaders try to invest in that. But stepping back further to early 2000, let's look at some of the context and understand how Tableau came to form. So I don't know how many of you have experience with other CBI tools, but this is how the DS or the whole development process looks like in business users who talk with business intelligence team, work with the developers who were again at the mercy of PDAs. And the whole process took a long time, and Tableau came in this environment and offered something to business users that, hey, you don't have to stream by this case of data, you don't be constrained by the limitations of the set that allow for two business users. Oh, hey, you can do this. You don't need IP for that. And that will offer another thing, instant gratification. See all those visualizations and so that is a way of thinking business users. So they end up buying this, and then when we are playing with the border, we realize some of the problems that are associated with the marketing. You see, this is a quote from one Tableau employee, social media forums, like one of the customers and some resources. And that happens, we saw like how our organization has self-ops. If you don't apply secrets of what we can reuse, we can have some nutrition for that one as well. So this is an example of that. You also have policies. Slow performance. If you're developing anything more than a single dashboard, working on data sets, this happens. And there is a combination of factors, and some of that will be on data, but if you're interested, you can always be working with some of the workers. So knowing all of these things, we want to go over this because we want you to develop a platform that is scaling to end users. But we are a startup, we don't have all the resources. So that is one of our constraints. So with that, here are some of our designs. As a healthcare company, the number one priority for us was security of patient information. Irrespective of what we deliver as a product, we have to always maintain that we have also security. The reason why we decided to purchase Tableau was to give us access, give the customer all of our customers access to that. And we already said resource objects. With that, how we approach our design. We directly learned, we didn't get it right first time, but I'll just walk you through some of our iteration here. If you have additional resources on some organization that's going separate Tableau server or create a custom portal and integrate into cluster documentation. We eliminated both of those shares because of resources that we maintaining that. With all of that, what we found the need was creating separate sites for separation of users, the content, so there's no overlap. So we went to that approach initially. For our internal users, we created public private departments, departmental projects, users, for external users, simple with security and started publishing that. But we quickly started learning problems. And the problem was that more and more of our internal users started requesting access to the same dashboards that were accessible to external users. Now, if you want to give access to employees to the external side, you want to have all the users, and groups, and all the permissions. So that really defeats the purpose of having sites. So we didn't want to do that. So we started application content for external side. And with time, we started to write more data sources and reports, and the quantum migration process in Tableau. So we started a revolution. So we took up lunch and decided to bring all of our external users to the internal side. This did require doing all the projects and the permissions. But it didn't work, and it's our current setup. It might be change in the future, but that's our current setup. most of every department internally has their own private department space, and then there's also kind of one area with content ownership identified by the department that we call as public department. We use a lot of dashboards on our student communities, as well. So that's one area, and all the external users are accessing the dashboards and same stuff. And we're going to look at some of more of the security. So we didn't want one thing that we didn't want to go in with whether you're external users or internal users, say apply different set of principles. Same data sources, the same one are accessible, are accessed by everyone. And all of the data that changes is based on. This is how we approach role security. Internal employees access it by the group membership, and external users use something called as entitlement statement. So this is a term I've learned at the EC, user security table, where we maintain users in their authorized, the user that are authorized to set them in data. For us, that means we call it concept. So for different data level access, there's just a long list of usernames that's created based on the security structures, and then we see John with fact tables. So this is independent of fact tables, so depending on the use cases, you can just bring in security in that is all the source. And finally, this is all combined with they look at the group membership of our employees and look at whether the user exists in a list of offers. There are some limitations of this approach, but after having some conversation with that employees, I've been told that this is fine if you have a list of users is a couple of hundred or so. And between 2018 or 3, they have also released a feature which will allow you to create extracts with separate tables. And then they can scale this approach to you. So, and why do this? You can go another way, you can approach your security ways as well. But keep in mind that if you're doing live queries, you are limited by the performance of your dashboard. And if you have complex dashboards, achieving that with less than 5 seconds dashboard performance can be challenging. Folks here on Snowflake can help us solve the problem as well. Most of other traditional legacy dashboard services is the challenge. So some of our key takeaways, the default project permissions, they're really helpful. As you can see, we use them to define the permissions to customer accounts. And that really sets the default project permissions as the template for any new project that you create. You can obviously tweak that and have the set tag, but that prevents any human mistakes. So that we use that extensively. While we're setting up your UI portal environment, what people talk about is you can benefit the same, you can apply the same principles the software industry is doing. Things such as code reuse, modularity, all of that can really help. Quite often you'll see workflows with very custom design workflows of data sources, and then people start making combinations of that, and then you go back to the same situation that with 9,000 sources. Well, it may not be 9,000 for you, but the point is there's a lot of duplication of resources happening. And keep in mind, it's not just the content itself, you have the extract of so it takes that value of server resources. Role security actually is very easy. Besides the database work, actually from server side, it's actually pretty easy. Some of the things that we're playing with is right now is giving more communication. We have everyone set up a visual sample that seems to well, except for there are some issues. Is anybody using multi-factor authentication here? So that's, there were some challenges for us to integrate with final settings and stuff like that. And some of the things we're looking into right now, there was also a presentation on ideally, since we are so much into the business of managing accounts for our customer, we actually may not be doing that in that business. So we're looking into how we can get the customer so that users can sign in their own email account using a single sign-on. So can potentially have that. So we got, let's say, kind of happy with the way we build the platform, we have reasonable security, but still, the big problem in BI is not the approach or the design, it's the option. How many of you have experience that you just bring the BI, start running and asking for option? Did you have to work with them, or was your experience different? So for us, we have the same challenges with with Devil Server. And one breakthrough we got when our executive started requested, like, hey, can you guys, we have a couple of meetings in our console for what we call a console for Innovation Center. Can we get some metrics of it? Can we get them displayed in real time? So this is how all of our consoles are coordinated. This is kind of like a virtual call center where we get requests for consoles from facilities all over the country, and they get routed to different physicians. Physicians also are located remotely. They could be all over the country. So it's a classic demand supply problem. Same as everyone, same as training schedules. If you can't overstaff and you start losing money, we're talking about physician salaries here. And if you underserve, that impacts the patient care. So making this balance is very challenging. And one of the things we try to use the visual communication tools that are available, help these coordination agents understand where potential gaps are going to be as far as the supply planning. Calls for the physician just give you the heads of so that was our first experiment with TV, and we were dealing with things like JavaScript. And it went well. One thing though, TV is not the same as your R7 processor, so that thing we learned. And overall, these things ran for 2 weeks at a time until we came up with a better solution. But overall, our experience with running dashboards and is very positive. That was held up pretty well with all the additional usage. And I'm going to make some quotes in here so we don't have to do that. But once users were starting to use this, or at least not really interact, but use that in their daily processes, we started getting requests. So this is how we display some of the metrics outside the coordination center. One thing you might have seen is that executives don't have time to actually log in and dashboards. But this really changed everything. The executives started seeing that data. This really mattered. Why they could see the daily regulations and ask the questions. So it became like a conversation starter, whether you're an analyst or a CEO. So everybody would start to do one other thing is, I'm going to talk display on the dashboard. It also helped to, make more decisions. And one other big use is that help us with what's story. So, rather than, in a situation where it's lost in laptop or there's no screen, they just walk around, look at different things, all the data is different. There's no new data request, and they can tell the story, what's happening, and all the data is real, everything is So that really helped with telling the story to prospective customers. And I'm seeing this is being used right now even to explain what we do to prospective candidates as well. So this has been really helpful. So while we are doing one of those dashboards here, initially I think we titled this dashboard like process in like last branch or something. But until we came on, landed on the title lifestyle, and that really kind of set the tone. It wasn't just about data. We're talking about these lives, and that's what the patient care is more important than the data. So these little changes actually can have impact. I think I can talk about the demand supply. This is one of the dashboards that we have. Again, this helps us understand the complexity of running business operations, how we have different spines, and why that particular spine happens. If you have having more spine in demand, potentially are going to miss your essence, are not going to be able to respond in that. So this helps us, especially in the plan with positions. So this is how we ended up doing it. There are some examples on the web as well. But after we did follow some of those tutorials, so we had to really expand on how we do writing. So we iterated and came up with an approach which is not dependent on survey or else can be saved. Dashboards easy. So essentially it involves loading your dashboard and refreshing after certain refreshing happy to share the tool. So all of that really helped improve engagement with the internal stakeholders, but how do we improve that engagement with adoption and understanding customers? That's the second challenge. So believe it or not, Tableau can help you as well. That's why I'm calling Tableau for email marketing. And the reason why I'm using it in email marketing is because the emails you receive subscription Tableau server is this is an image dashboard which encourages people to actually log in and hopefully explore the data. The great thing with subscriptions though is that it works in conjunction with security. So as we're adding more and more dashboards, again we want to provide a quick summary, personalized for each customer account, and then that's when we create a summary dashboards which are sent to each of our clients. Giving them a quick overview, okay, what happened in the last 30 days, last 40 days, these are all the things that have changed. So that really helped improve the engagement from our customers as well. So we looked at how we can quickly have hundreds of thousands of users, but what you can do to prevent those things. Unfortunately, there's no automation tool for that we manage it more using like meetings and working with analysts and looking for publishing. We do have an internal dashboard that just looks at different data sources that have been published and what we use is a term called desirability. What we actually desire is published data sources. Ideally, it extracts and there's a software is for media and which applies to most of our keys. So that's our green state, and then all other states, all other states of legal that are not desirable are things such as Excels or embedded data sources. One problem with embedded data sources is people create copies of that and they are refreshing and used. So this is how we track. Again, this is built using the source. Again, and another thing is when we give the primary area to the department, enable your business users to do what they wish to, and then we have what they call a certified with the data sources, which is where we come in. Make sure it uses certain design principles. And if somebody is trying to publish data source for March 2018, probably not going to allow that. Just because, come April 1st, that thing is no longer valid or So, how can they, work, make sure that we have a broader use case rather than very but they the analysts are still empowered to reach their target. Another thing we look at the problem with growing data deployment is performance problems. And there is a very nice design work. So my paper, we have to go through some extensive performance tuning exercises for many of our customer workers. And here are some key takeaways, like really high points that we want to look at. There is a viewer tool available for Tableau log viewer, and you get the logs either from desktop or server. But this is a quick process, and if you have like multiple dashboards, you can slowly start taking them apart and see where it's weak point. And from there, that really helps you identify the specific issues. Maybe once you have narrowed it down to a specific sheet or tab, you can take triggers, or maybe define the action triggers or the calculations. So that's one thing. Another thing that will really help you with performance problems is understanding the Tableau's operations. But you want to bring as little data as possible into your worksheet. You can redirect the data source or else. One area that actually has really significant impact on performance, and which is not as widely understood or appreciated by at least some people, is the impact of calculated fields. As we are doing that tuning exercise, at one point I was able to like even having a filter which does x equal to 1, then yes versus no, something like that, versus doing like a Boolean calculation actually had 1 second on the board. So, and the nested calculations are really bad. Tableau does makes the calculation at the single row, and those nested calculations are really good calculations. If you start with custom SQL and using live connections, if you are building anything more than simple, bar charts or raster, more likely than that, depending on what's your data model, you run into some performance problems with custom SQL and live connections. Again, that's because there is no Tableau is not going to be able to look at the code which is inside the custom SQL and how you use that. So that's the root cause here. And as you know, there are multiple SQLs that Tableau has to run in order to render visualization. So this is, just to summarize, this is how DSI platform look like. This is how it is. Those project line coders are not that exciting, but this portal has definitely enabled us to deliver sensitive information for patients or other different stakeholders, just physicians, customers, and colleagues. This is one of those dashboards that we have to work on performance tuning. This is the classic benchmarking dashboard where you compare yourself with certain peers, and the users blending things like multiple workbooks, filters, and action. So that's when we really had to work on this. The bottom left problems that we get using parameters because Tableau very recently support them filters, but I don't know if you have looked at the recent development in Tableau extensions. There are some extensions that are now with parameters. I haven't played with them yet, but that's something. So lessons learned since we benefit. Just to summarize, what we found out of the strength of Tableau solution, some of your developers with the dashboard and great for publishing. The things on the left, what Tableau is not, it's not a database. So if you're trying to get an extract with the data, right, that's probably not good. And And the last point probably is it's not a spreadsheet. So most people, most of your users, or at least some of them, ask for in-level spreadsheet style, but that's not the strength of that. Yeah, so that's about it. That's also for discussion. I do love personally here for visually. I have a couple of tools for visualization professional. First is a visualization search engine. Second is a surveying tool that will help you with SMEs and with dashboards. Both of them are free. There's a great fee into that. And this one is a search engine. So that's about it. Thank you very much for your time.
Hey, my name is Paul Albert. Until a year ago, I was an employee of Tableau. I was part of the public sector sales team. And since then, I've retired. I'm doing graduate studies at George Mason, art history and digital humanities. I'm trying to use computational techniques to better understand art history. But I'm also a part-time Tableau instructor. And that's the genesis of what made me create this presentation and ask Brittany to come present here. Some of the key takeaways I want to talk about is really around averages and how people think about averages, how people calculate averages. And there's three phases I'll be talking about: the calculation of an average, the interpretation of an average, and then the representation of an average. And these are the key takeaways that I'm hoping to get from this talk, and we'll go over each key takeaway. There's two books that really inform this presentation. The one on the left, The Truthful Art, Alberto Cairo, I couldn't recommend it more. How many people in the audience have read it? Okay, so a handful. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. If you do have a question, ask me during the talk, and I'll repeat it so that those in the audience would be able to hear. So while I was with Tableau, I was responsible for organizing training and helping to deliver training for about 2,000 different people, over 100 different sessions, training sessions. And our typical modus operandi would be to go to a presentation. Here's how you do calculations, here's how you create charts. But what we never did was ask the people to create something that we would then do. So there was no feedback. So I got this tremendous aha moment when I started doing my instruction. Mostly I'm instructing at graduate public affairs programs. So these are the type of people who are going to be given Tableau and say, okay, make sense of this data. You know, the young people. What I did is I went over with the Makeover Monday. Is the group familiar with Makeover Monday? Yeah. So every Sunday they release a data set. A number of people will participate by producing visualizations, posting them, and then at the end of the week they do a review. So when I would do a session, the homework exercise for the students was to take from a set of Makeover Monday data sets and create a visualization. And I made it just a specific set because I didn't want to have to learn the data for every single set. But the most popular set that students chose was a data set that talked about drinking habits in Britain. So this was Makeover Monday in 2017, 21. So these are all grad students. They can relate. If you look at the way the data is structured, we have a field for every year, a field for age range, and there's a number of age ranges that aren't here. The gender, we have men, women, and then we have all people. And then the question is, did you drink alcohol in the last week? There's another question, did you drink alcohol in the last 2 days? Did you drink alcohol in the last day? And what they were trying to do was report on drinking habits in Britain. So this is a worksheet that was done by one of my students, and I'm pretty sure that she had some training in Tableau before my 3-hour class because I didn't discuss putting icons into visualizations or creating a box like it's on the upper right. And what struck me is that she spent a lot of time worrying about how the visualization looked, which is a good thing to do, but there were specific issues in how the visualization was built. So if you remember, when we talk about the genders, we have men, we have women, and we have all persons. And then we have a number of years and we have a number of age ranges. And when we look at what she did to create the alcohol consumption by year, is she just took the average of the proportion. So the proportion, again, looking at the data, is going to say, for this set of men who are age 16 to 24 for this year, how many reported drinking alcohol last year? Now, the problem with doing that, and she similarly did that with the consumption by age, is it comes to how your average is calculated. So this is the biggest gotcha that I've seen among my students and when they try to calculate averages. So we have two different groups. Group 1 has 100 people. I'm sorry, group 1 has 1,000 people, 100 of them like red. Group 2 has 100 people, 80 of them like red. Now, one approach, and this is what a lot of students would do, is take the average of the averages. I'm going to add 10% to 80%. I'm up 90%. I have two groups. I'll divide it by 2, and that'll get me to 45%. Is anyone concerned about that? I was as well. Approach number 2 is to calculate a new average. So what we're going to do is add the numerators and add the denominators and come up to this new average, which is actually 16% like red. This isn't really an isolated problem. How many of you saw the story that 60% of the animal species in the world have been extinguished? This came out last week. It was the World Wildlife Foundation. And the Atlantic ran a really nice article about it. And in it, what they talked about is how that average was created. And it's the same problem. They didn't say what was the average decline. They said what was the average of the averages decline. So this story in the Atlantic gives an example of incorrectly calculating what would happen if we went from 5,000 lions, 500 tigers, 50 bears, to 4,500 lions, 100 tigers, 5 bears, and 1. Looking at the average of the averages, the decline is 60%. But looking at what the actual, how many actual animals have gone down, it's only 16%. So how many people think that it's really easy to make this mistake? Yeah, I do as well. So I was asked to teach at a statistics course at George Mason University, and the professor showed me the book that they were using called Political Science Research Methods. This is edition 6 of this book, and in it, they do exactly the same mistake. So they're saying this is how you decide how many doctors there are per 100,000 population. And they said, let's just add the values and divide by 19.
Well, they can do that if the denominators.
I'm sorry?
They can do that if the denominator is always the same.
The comment was they can do that if the denominator is always the same. But what we see is that each line in our table is a different country. So it's the country and then the doctors per 100,000 people is what the writers of this book are saying how you can do it. Luckily, this didn't make it into the 7th edition. How it made it all the way through the 6 editions, I'm not sure. But you know, it's something. My wife is a marvelous proofreader, so I go down the street with her, and she goes, "That sign's misspelled. That sign's misspelled. That sign's misspelled." And the more I look at what people do, or the way that averages are calculated, I find that often they're calculated incorrectly. So your comment was, if you have the same denominator, you're able to combine it and find out what the averages of averages are. So this is Makeover Monday, week 22, 2017, and it's giving the number of internet users per 100 people. Can we combine and average these numbers? How many people think we can do it? How many people think we can't do it? I thought we could do it. You know, I had just finished this presentation and I started to do it, and Eva Murray, who was running that Makeover Monday, made a comment that this is just another word for percentage. Saying 98.2 people per 100 is the same thing as saying 98.2%. You know, so I, after writing this presentation last year, got fooled for about 10, 15 minutes, but it's an easy trap to fall into. So it's not just averages that pose problems. It's aggregation of any ratios. When I joined Tableau, they took us into a boot camp, and I didn't really understand why, but the first thing that they wanted to do was talk about Superstore and talk about calculating the profit ratio and how we just can't take the sum of the profit ratio. So what I've done is I've taken Superstore, and these are all order IDs, so each row is an order ID, the profit and sales and the profit ratio. I put it in Excel. This is showing what the formula is in Excel. So it's taking column B, dividing it by column C. Now, the wrong way to calculate an overall average would be to take a sum of the averages. Everyone agree? You know? And then the right way would be to take the sums and then find the ratio of the sums. So what we want to do is calculate the ratio of the sums, not the sums of the ratio. Now, what would happen to me with a lot of my students, and I encourage you to be on the lookout, is they would get some nonsensical number like this, and then what they would say is, well, let me just change it from sum to average, which is the same problem as averaging of averages. So they are similar. So if you actually take this, which is 56,707%, divided by the number of quantity, 5010, we actually come up to like a 111.3%. And then they would divide it by 100 to make the average look like it was something that was workable. And honestly, I mean, there's been times where I was playing around with a Makeover Monday or something like that when I was just learning, and I would sort of try to whack it into place and make things slip free. And it's really a problem that's easy to fall into. So takeaway point number one is really when we do this, what we need to do is understand what our numerator and denominator are. Sounds simple. Let's go ahead and take a look inside Tableau. So I'm going to pull up Superstore. How many people have used Superstore? a good section. So you guys are going to be with me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take category, and then I'm going to take my profit and push this out a bit. So if we look at our rows, we see that what's being calculated is the sum of profit. How would we come up with the average profit? What I'm hoping for is someone say change the aggregation level. Sorry? Eventually, yeah. But something that's easy to do is just go to the measure and say, let's look at the average. Let me turn on mark labels. You know, and a lot of people do this and walk away saying, yes, I found the average. However, as we just figured out, in order to figure out what our average is, we need to understand what the numerator and denominator are. So if we go into Superstore, and we actually look at it, I'm sorry, let me step back. So when Tableau is calculating this average, what it's doing is it's taking the sum of price and it's dividing it by what? The number of rows. Yeah, so it's saying for every record, we're going to take the total number of records, and then we're going to divide it by what that sum is. Now, if we look at what the data is, I just clicked on View Data under Dimensions. We see that Superstore is set up where each row is a specific line item for an order. So an order can have multiple line items, and here we see the product name is the Bush Somerset collection bookcase. And if you look on the right, the quantities are, they're not similar. You know, so every row has a different quantity of that line item. So in order to create the correct calculation, what we need to do is create a calculated field. And we're going to call this average profit. And we're going to take the sum of the profit, and we're going to divide it by the sum. What do you think I should divide it by? The quantity. And that's our average profit. And if we drag it out, we see that the correct calculation is dramatically different than just changing how we aggregate based on levels. So now we're dividing by the correct number. It's just happenstance that the ratio is approximately the same. The ratio could be completely different depending on how our data was structured. And that kind of bums me out, but you know, that's the case. So now let's go one step further. So I'm going to take average profit off, and now we have the aggregate of what our average profit is. And now what I want to do is figure out what the average of all the products are. So I'm going to take an average line, I'm going to drag it out across the table, and then I'm going to go here and edit it. And whenever I play with average or reference lines, a good practice is I change the label to custom, and I say, first thing I want to do is put in the computation, colon, and then I want to put in the value. So in this case, our average is 9.54. Is this correct? Sorry? Why not?
That's the average of the 3 bars, not the average.
Exactly. Exactly. You guys are so much faster than my students. So anyway, if we look down here at the left, we see we have 3 marks, 1 row by 3 columns, and the sum of the aggregate is 28.6. That doesn't really help us. Does anybody here use worksheet summaries? So this is an option that you can click on, and it's going to look at the data. So this is our worksheet summary. So we have 3 different bars, or 3 different marks. The sum of them is 28.61. And if you divide 28.61 by 3, you're going to come up with the average of what you said. So how would we fix this? Sorry? I missed that.
Just draw more picture.
I'm going to do a different thing. So the comment was just drop off category. Let me go to analysis. And rather than aggregating measures, I'm going to uncheck it. And we see our average has dropped to 8. And I'll go here and format this, and let's go ahead and make this 2 decimal points just so we. So 7.8. So we went from 9.54 for the average of all 3 to 7.80. And it's not magic. I mean, what I just want to point out is that these are easy traps that users can fall into as they start working with Tableau, and how important it is anytime you see an average to try to understand what the numerator and denominator are.
Could you show me what you just unticked?
Yeah, here under analysis, there's this aggregate measures, and then I said unaggregate. So now, if we look at our summary card, we have 9,994 marks, a different sum, and then a different average. You know, so looking at the summary card while you're working with data really can help speed can help you fall out of some traps.
But then how can you make it bars again?
Save that question for the end, and we'll see if we want to do that. So the next point is that even when calculated correctly, averages might not mean that much. And this is going into problems in interpreting averages. How many people are familiar with Anscombe's quartet? So in 1973, Francis Anscombe, a statistician, wanted to prove to fellow statisticians how important it was to visually data. So he came up with this quartet. These are 4 sets of numbers. Each set of number has the exact same mean, the exact same arithmetic average. They have the exact same variance, the same mean, and they have the same linear regression line. So to many statisticians, what Francis was saying to statisticians is, when you look at these measures, you think that all 4 of these data sets are completely the same. But when you visualize them, you see that they're completely different. So that's sort of underscoring the importance of visualization, which is something I'm sure we all agree on. Looking a little further at Anscombe's quartet, we see dramatically different distributions and how the values are arranged. So there's skews in some are following the normal distribution. And averages lose meaning when you start talking about skewed populations. And by averages, it's a very general word. Averages can actually mean median. An average is a measure of centralized tendency, to use the academic description. So a median could be an average, a geometric mean could be an average, a harmonic mean could be an average. But by average, I'm using what most people discuss as average, including Tableau. Because when you say average something, Tableau finds the arithmetic mean of that thing. But let's say that you want to be a geography major, and this is out of Alberto Cairo's book. You want to be a geography major. Most geography majors across the country earn $50,000. However, for University of North Carolina in 1986, the average graduate earned over $1 million. Would that make you switch schools? Nobody's taking that. But, you know, would knowing that Michael Jordan was a geography major at the University of North Carolina in those years help you understand why that average is so different from all the other averages? And this is right out of Alberto Cairo's book, but you know, there's a distinction between when you have a skewed population, rather than saying what is the average of the population, or what was the average salary of the population, it's better saying what is that? What did the average person earn? And the average person would be the median. Make sense? Okay. So we just talked about the arithmetic mean. The idea is that we have a normalized distribution, and if we wanted to, we add up all the numbers, divide it, and then we find out what the average is, or the mean is. So that's what that red dot on the right is. That's the mean of this data set. You see it fits perfectly in the data set, and it's sort of like right in the middle. However, if we had a data set that was skewed, if we look at the arithmetic mean, that's in the middle, and it's off of our data. But if we look at something called the geometric mean, and I'm not going to really go into geometric, it's arithmetic. And this, but I want you to realize there's a distinction. We see that it actually falls in the middle. Something I've been puzzling over is in both those examples, the median is what the actual number is that makes sense to represent the average. And you know, really, how often could the median be about what the geometric mean is? So I need to do a little bit of research on it. So an average is a measure of centralized tendency. Alfred North Whitehead, a philosopher who studied science, talked about something about the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. So it's the idea that we have this number, and that number in itself is something that completely describes what we're trying to talk about. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this idea. But the point is, sometimes when we try to come up with simple numbers, sometimes when we try to come up with simple representations, we often distort what the reality is. And there's a great book about the rules of statistics where the author is puzzling over how most statistician thinks that you're making more sense by throwing data away. And that's what we're doing when we just talk about the means. We're kind of throwing the rest of the data away. So, takeaway point number 2, understanding the shape of the data is just as important as understanding the average of the data. This is a dolphin box. How many people have ever seen something or are familiar with the idea? So it's like a pachinko machine. You know, you drop a ball at the top, it hits pins, and ultimately you'll go right to the left. And if you do it enough times, this is a sample of the distribution will look like. And there's a great YouTube video where they actually automate that and they show you the balls falling down, and it's really a lot of fun. So let's look at the distribution of the balls. So on average, which bins have the most black balls? Yeah, I'm thinking the ones on the left. You know, on average, which bins have the most white balls? Yeah, I'm thinking the ones on the right. So this is a property of, it's called the law of large numbers. This is just a property of how stuff happens in the world. That you get skewed distributions when you go to smaller and smaller data sets. So there was a study done of what size schools or what size school you needed to have in order to do well. And they looked at the smaller schools, and they found that the smaller schools, on average, were much more likely to be in the top decile of performance than the larger schools. So the conclusion was that smaller schools improved students. Bill and Melinda Gates thought enough of this finding that they spent $2 billion on promoting small schools. Now the problem with this, and they found that the approach was flawed, or they didn't get the bang for the buck that they wanted. And one person came along and they said, well, what we're doing is just looking at where the good schools are. You also need to look at where the bad schools are. And this is looking at the change in 4th grade math scores based on school size. So the smaller schools have the best improvements, but they also have the worst improvements. I'm sorry? Because they have the greatest variances. Because they have the greatest variance. Because they have the greatest variance, exactly. So I'm making a visual correlation between this plot and this result. You know, just like when we were looking at black and white balls, you're going to find the greatest variance in the smallest, with the smallest numbers. And that's takeaway point number 3. Smallest groups will always show the greatest variance. So let's talk about problems in representing averages. So this is average annual rainfall by region, central, east, southwest. Actually, let me do a brief segue. How many people are working with data that they can't share with Tableau when they're trying to troubleshoot? You know, all of my clients, I've covered agencies in the government. This is actually Superstore data where I just titled annual average rainfall by region. You know, I actually had a law enforcement agency that wanted to know what my drug confiscations for the past month, how they compared with the falling average for the past 6 months. And what we did is we went to Superstore and we renamed furniture to opium, and we renamed technology to cocaine. And it's really, you can recreate almost anything in Superstore and change all the labels and be able to use it when you seek help from others. So you can create this problem, any problem you're facing, in a way that you can then send it to Tableau and then reach out to others. Okay, back from the segment. So this is average rainfall by region. And what I have are 2 dots on the central region. One is A and one is B. Now we're looking at next year. How many people think that the average rainfall of B is more likely to have average rainfall of A. How many people think A is more likely than B? Okay. Right, right. It's a sophisticated audience. So typically what I do is I get people who say B is the most likely. And maybe I gave it away, or maybe you guys are a little worried about being trapped. But you know, this is basically what we're representing, is that A is closer to the mean than B. However, when it's represented as a bar, it's sort of like B is contained in the bar, but A is outside of it. So there's a cognitive psychologist named George Newman from Yale who did a study. He hired a couple hundred students, and I think he did Amazon. And what he found is that there's a within the bar bias. That when people are presented bars that are supposed to represent a variance, they think things are more likely to happen inside the bar than outside the bar. And this is exactly the same thing we were talking about, the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. You know, the idea that the bar is somehow containing the opportunities or what could happen. So there's been lots of different ways. This has been repeated 4 or 5 times, and everyone's found about the same thing. And as an art history major, I really find it fascinating, the idea that the construction of the bar and the way people think about that bar is somehow it's containing all of the variants. So with that said, do you still suggest that we do a line bar showing the average? Thank you. Good. So this is just trying to take this visualization in another direction. So if I have a single category, let's say region, and I have a single measure, let's say annual rainfall, and I put it onto Tableau, what is the default visualization that Tableau is going to give? A bar chart, yeah. So I suggest that rather than going with the bar chart when we're dealing with things with variance, is first thing I did is I turned it into a dot, and then I noticed that on the right for the Western region, you know, there just wasn't enough room above it. It sort of seemed like it was contained in there. So I manually adjusted the axes to allow for more room above the Western region. And this is a real quick, simple fix that can help your users make better decisions based on the data. So I'm not claiming it was based on a bar chart, but actually in 1997, U.S. Weather Service forecasted North Dakota, the Red River would crest at 49 feet. And the officials made flood management plans based upon that single figure, that misplaced fallacy of concreteness. It's got to be 49 feet. In fact, the river crested above 50 feet. And we know that there's probably as much of a chance of the river going to 48 feet as the river going to 51 feet. But what happened is the dikes were breached, 50,000 people were forced to you know, when we're working with data, when we're working with interpreting data, interpreting it the wrong way, not understanding the variation that could be in the data, could lead to bad mistakes. And that's why I like teaching this to public policy students. So takeaway point number 4 is to beware of using bar charts to represent averages, or any ratio for that matter. So what are averages good for? I would suggest that the best use for an average is to use it as a point of comparison. This is another behavioral psychology study. And what they wanted to do was to first start with error bars. So on the left, using the error bars, are the common ways that scientists nowadays show uncertainty in representation. Even then, they found that people were more likely to choose things within the bar than outside the bar, even though you had that error bar that was going outside the bar. Then they went to a modified box plot, and they found that it still wasn't quite successful. They had the most luck in the students making the right decisions with this gradient plot that's third from the right. I haven't figured out a really easy way to make this Tableau. And anyone who can, you know, please do so. And then on the far right is a violin chart, and you'll find lots of how-to videos on how to make violin charts inside Tableau. Now this was an example of using an average, a good way of using an average that was suggested by Albert Cairo in the book The Truthful Science, The Truthful Art. Thank you very much. And what we're doing is we're looking at the prevalence of different types of music. So in this sense, what we're doing is looking at the rise and fall of the drum machine. And in the bottom, you'll see that the circles are being sized by how close to the mean they are. So the closer to the mean the circles are, the bigger the circle. So we're kind of getting a little to a violin chart type of thing. And then you'll also see that gray is if it's beneath average, and green is if it's above average. And this is an example of their website where you could highlight a single point and see what the song was that they were talking about. I'm not sure how to get it. I think this is a really great way of showing averages. I would say that because there's so much height above the mean, it almost makes it look like it's more likely that you'll fall above the mean than below the mean. And that's a fact that they're constraining this at 0, and it needs to be constrained at 0. Bollinger Bands. How many are fans of Bollinger Bands? These are great ways of showing uncertainty across time. This visualization could have been done as a Bollinger Band, where what we're showing is the range of confidence levels. Moving averages, another good way of trying to make sense of where everything is. And what impressed me about the book is this idea of not just sticking with the moving average, but looking at how much things move outside of the average. Last example from the Truthful Art, and what we have is months and then a line that's representing going across by year. So to the left is the most recent, to the right for each month is the, to the left is the oldest, to the right is the most recent. Then what they're doing is showing an average line for each month, and then going across, they're showing an average line for the entire data set. And I think that's a really intelligent way to show variation and to help people understand how does my variation compare to other things. So again, we're using an average to anchor a comparison. So I've been in love with this idea of a unit histogram. One of the things that I really think we should be doing is finding ways to show how, I'm sorry, I'm enlarging it on my screen, but it's not going on that screen. Find ways that how a part fits within the whole. So on the right, you see that we have pretty much a histogram that's showing every single point, and then they're shading in areas about where the median and the upper and lower quartile are. This is something that last year Stephen Few introduced a bar type called the Wheatfield, which is a kind of a histogrammic type of chart. And Steve Wexler spent a lot of time looking at that, thought about how to improve it, and came up with this idea of the unit histogram. Looking on the internet, I found that there was a text from Twitter, a tweet from Matt Hughes in 2014, where he's pretty much explaining how to do the same thing. But again, they're really good ways to show how does the whole compare with where the average is.
Give the box plot very great. So this is a box plot.
Right. I'd have to, I never tried to do exactly this. I've never tried to create one. But he didn't create a blog. We're talking about the Matt Hughes thing on the left. Matt didn't create a blog describing how to do it, so he thought it was easy enough that all I had to say is add your value as a discrete dimension for distribution. It's worth a try. So that's the takeaway point number 5, is averages are great to anchor comparisons. So with all that said, this is a Tableau Viz of the Day by Ann Jackson from October 2017. And what she's looking at is how obesity in America has changed from 2011 to 2015. And Ann Jackson can just run circles around it in creating things and analyzing things. And I'm putting this up not as a criticism, but as a point to just think about. You know, as we look at, this is a visualization that's depicting averages. It's depicting the averages as bars, where people don't necessarily see there's a variance in those averages. Probably the Makeover Monday data set didn't have that. Possibly a data set that you're being asked to make sense of doesn't have that. She color codes the states that are obesity is lowering, which makes a lot of sense. If I had all the skills and if I were to try to work with this, you know, maybe making this more a slope line for each state and then comparing it on each state with a slope line for the United States. You know, so what we're looking at is we're comparing the averages for the country with the averages for each state with the average for the country. Anybody have other ideas of how they might improve it? It's pretty nice. How am I doing on time? Okay. So I'm just going to go and suggest an easy way to depict averages with what we were showing with Superstore. I'm going to drag my category out to my columns. I'm going to drag my profit out to my rows. I'm going to see that the first thing Tableau comes up with is this idea of let's show a bar chart. I'm going to go up to my analysis and say show this as an aggregate measure. And I'm going to change my marks to circles. And then I'm going to reduce the size of the circles. And this is a Pat Hanrahan, one of the founders of Tableau's trick, is I'm going to reduce the opacity of my circles in order to show how they line up with each other. So what I'm trying to do is create a little bit of a heat map. Yesterday, I downloaded Tableau 2018.3, which has density marks, and I'm just not getting love from that. So if I go down to density, this is what Tableau gives me. So, has anyone used density marks on this sort of visualization? I'm not sure why. I think it'll work on a map. I think it'll work on a scatter plot. I'm just not sure why it's not working here. All right. I would have hoped that it would have worked here. You know, if I wanted, this is pretty good. You know, if I wanted to try to show even more heat sort of things, I could go down to my border and just change like the border color. And I'm kind of forcing a color dithering here where it's making the hot things a little bit more transparent. But I really think that just going with the color and no border is fine. Next, what I would do is come out and I'm going to bring out an average line. I'm going to bring it out to each cell. And then let's make this a little bit fancier. And we're going to add region. So we can compare the regions for each one of the categories. So when we were talking about statistics, when we're talking about averages, I made the point that we're throwing data away in order to try to make sense of data. In order to make sense of this more effectively, I would suggest that we try throwing some of the data away. So I'm going to go to worksheet and show my summary. So we have, I'm sorry, this is enlarging on my screen. So we have 9,994 points. If I say, what if I were just to select this range here? So I'm like plus and minus 500. We see that we actually have 99.6 of the points circled. So I'm going to go ahead and just alter my axes to show plus 500 and minus 500. And if I were to title it, I would say 99% of values being shown, 99% of words being shown. But now we really have a better way to compare things. And I would actually even look maybe going to 200 and plus 200. I think that gets us 98%. Does this offend anyone throwing out data to show a visualization? I'm sort of on the fence. Yeah. Yeah.
Tell the user.
Sorry?
It's fine if you tell the user.
Yeah, you gotta tell the user you're doing it, and we do have dots that are being cut off, and you need to tell the user. But the difference between this and this, you just, other than saying go mouse around and figure out what the values are, but then you're really not able to compare the values to each other. And this is what statistics is all about. It's trying to come up with ways of representing something about a range of things. So what we're looking for is a measure of central tendency. And I think we're doing that. And then I would clean up the axes lines. I might add some labels. But I think it's a fairly good way of showing this information that's going to lead to better decisions than if we stuck with the defaults of using the bars. Yes?
I often write a calculation that passes the 1% back in, but just pegs them at the axes. So if the value is greater than, pay it up here.
Right.
Less than.
That's great.
And that makes everything, I haven't thrown everything away. But you also haven't suffered, like you say, that outliers.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so the point was you could also write a calculation that could put your outliers sort of at the edge, and then everyone would be there. We could go logarithmic scale, but that's going to be a lot harder for people to interpret. There's some options for us, and really, if you're not doing, what I'm trying to argue is just don't do it as a bar. I think this is dramatically better than a bar. I don't think it's perfect, and this is what I would do in like 10 seconds.
So we had an exact similar situation, and the situation with the outliers, like they're not fitting into visualization. So one way we try to represent the outliers was have another visualization just to show how bad the outliers are, like stagnant or not.
That's great. Yeah. So the comment was you can also have another visualization dashboard to show outliers.
I love to do this. I could do this in front of my client and say, bars. Part of the problem is they give upper executives something like this, and they feel there's enough information they can make a business decision. But if you go back 2 screens, what you had before, there's probably not enough information to make a business decision. There's probably need to make a business decision based on granularity.
So the comment was that some executives would want to see bars, and I think visualization, you can bend the rules or you can break the rules if you have a reason. But just understanding how visualization works can help, inform. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. However, that still runs to that within the bar bias. So as you see, we have, so the question was, can we do a calculated bar? this type of dot visualization, the user looks at it, they see this is the average, but we see that there's a lot inside and outside the average. So if I'm planning for how big my levees should be, and someone says, well, the average rainfall is 49 feet, I can see, well, there's lots of years that it's above 49 feet, and I need to do something about it. Nope. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Right, so the question was, when we report averages, should we also report standard deviations? My background is I have a master's in public policy, I work for the government. I like to fancy myself as what a typical Tableau user could be. And I've got to tell you, when you start talking about standard deviations, yeah, it's something they taught me in school and I learned it in stat class, but, you know, is it really, you know, how significant is it? You know, I mean, I've tried to explain our square values and p-values and sort of got kind of head noddings, but part of it goes back to that point about the reification, or the idea of the concrete fallacy, is ultimately what we're doing is creating something for comparison. You know, while a statistician who's reporting standard deviations and all that, I think that could be done well in a table. But the point of the visualization isn't necessarily to describe all the data completely, it's to describe enough of the data so people get a feel. But depending on the audience, that a standard deviation. Well, thank you all very much. One quick thing. How many people here actually teach Tableau or have tried to teach Tableau? Okay, I have a website. It's more aspirational than informative. But on this website, Visualist.com, I've created 2 3-hour workbooks that I've made available to the public to use. So, along with the data sets. Last year's, I don't know what I was thinking. I went into level of detail calculations in the first intro to Tableau, but this year I think it's a lot better. And the point is, learn how to make line charts, bar charts, heat maps, words, text charts, and dashboards. You know, just give users quick wins that are fairly easy to understand with the innocuous data set about movies. So please feel free to use it. Okay, thank you.
I don't have any slides. Hopefully that's good news for you. Brittany just asked me to talk about TCT. My name is Sue Briss. Thank you, Mike. My name is Sue Briss. I work for Accenture Federal, and I've been using Tableau for about 9 years now, I think, or so, kind of a while. And I've been to 3 Tableau conferences, and so Brittany wanted me to say a few words about the Tableau conference. A lot of people here have gone to a Tableau conference. So, not as many as I thought. 15%-ish, would you say? You saw a good look there. Would you say about that? So, I would highly encourage you to go. I would tell you that I've been to 3. And I'll just give you a little background on my experience. So my first conference, I didn't know anybody else. And I'm actually pretty extroverted, but not when I'm with 15,000 people. I'm not as extroverted. And so I got a lot out of it because I just went to anything. I didn't know how to choose. At that time, there were probably still over 300 sessions. I'm guessing there were a lot. And I felt kind of hit or miss, but what I got from my first conference experience was incredible inspiration in the community out there, as well as some humility, which is a wonderful thing. Because most of us who are using Tableau, I suspect I'm not the only one. When we start using it, we put in front of our clients colored graphs. They think we are wonderful. We might not really be wonderful. They might just think we're wonderful because all they've ever seen are Excel data. And I've had the opportunity to build dashboards at very high levels in government sectors, and they told me I was wonderful and I believed them. But then I went to Tableau conference and I saw people who were truly wonderful, and it was wonderfully humbling. Because the other thing I learned was about Makeover Monday. And so I started kind of stalking them because it just felt a little too intimidating at first. But then I like to set goals, artificial goals that no one's really holding me to, but I feel like you are, especially if I trust them. So for 2017, I decided to make over Monday every single week. And I made it about 40 weeks, which served me well. But what I would tell you is that, so I learned about that at the first conference. I participated for those 40 weeks. And I learned more in those 40 weeks than I did in the previous 7 or 8 years of using Tableau. Because I think there's so much emphasis on learning the mechanics of Tableau, and we have an absence of the same emphasis on learning visual design skills. By participating in Makeover Monday, I learned who these awesome visualization designers are, like Brittany, like Mike Sisson, who's here in the front row, like all these other people out in the community. And I also found out that they were incredibly encouraging and supportive and available. So at my next conference, I found myself gravitating to presentations by people I had seen participate. And I came away even more inspired and learning more about what's going on in the community. So now if my client comes to me and has a question or how to do something, I immediately have ideas about designs that might work, and I can have a dialogue with them because I know how to go to Tableau Public and quickly point to these things. And then if they say, oh, I really love that design, I say, well, I have no idea to do that, but I can download that workbook and figure out how to do it. So it really is by going to the conference, getting inspired as well as humble, which I suspect I'm not the only one who needs that humbleness for and then finding a way to do something with that humility, to find a way to get a bit better. All of these things really came to me because of the conference. By going to the conference, getting that huge inspiration from all of the folks that are there, seeing the folks who are really the bedrock of our community in terms of their inspiration and talent and sacrificing time and finding out what they're doing, how to reach their work. These things all come about by going to the conference. This is not exactly what Brittany asked me to talk about. What else would you like me to talk about? So that was the conference. I guess I would highly encourage, if you can get to TC 19, try to go. I guess the other thing I'll say, I work for Accenture Federal. They acquired a smaller company I work for, so Accenture Federal is very big. And when I decided to go to the conference this year, I had to send emails to over 50 people before I finally got someone to say, Sue, we will fund you to go. I would tell you, be graciously persistent. If your organization says no the first time, it doesn't mean they're going to say no the 50th time. Just keep being graciously persistent. And so find new people to ask. So my other moral for you is if you're interested in going to TC 19, the second that is announced, it's out there, you can really register. Request from your employer funding to attend that conference. If, like me, you know they're going to say no the first time, that you have more time to pursue your argument. And so I've been 3 years in a row, and it hasn't been easy any single year, but I've been 3 years in a row. So that's the other thing I would say. It is really worth that persistence. But be gracious.